is still have the bank transfer confirmation on my phone. I haven't deleted it. Not because I need it anymore, the matter is settled, but because sometimes, on quiet evenings when I'm sitting in my apartment in Halifax with a cup of tea and the harbor outside my window, I look at it and remember exactly what 7 years of my life actually cost me. And I remember the moment I decided it was done. My name is not important. What matters is that I'm a 31-year-old registered nurse. I work rotating shifts at the QEII Health Sciences Center, and for 7 years I financially supported my younger brother Marcus, and eventually, the woman he was going to marry. I want to be very clear about something before I tell you what happened. I didn't do it because I was naive. I didn't do it because I was weak. I did it because our mother made me promise her she would, and I loved our mother made me promise her she would, and I loved our mother more than anything in this world. Mum passed away from ovarian cancer 6 years ago. She was 54. She was diagnosed in March and gone by October, and those 7 months felt like someone pressed fast forward on a life that should have had decades left in it. I was 25. Marcus was 22. He had just dropped out of his second year at Dalhousie again and was living in our mother's house in Dartmouth with no income, no plan, and absolutely no urgency about either of those facts. In the hospital, in her last week, Mum held my hand and she said to me, "Take care of your brother. He needs more time than you did. He always has." And I said yes. Because what else do you say to your dying mother? What I did not say, and I wish with everything I have that I had said it was, "Mum, for how long? And does that include whoever he decides to marry?" For the first 2 years it was manageable. I covered Marcus's rent at a basement apartment in Dartmouth, $1,100 a month. I paid his phone bill. I bought groceries when he texted that he was short. He was working part-time at a coffee shop and taking online courses, and it felt like progress even if it was slow. I told myself this was temporary. I told myself Mum was right. He just needed more time. Then he met her. My sister-in-law-to-be came into Marcus's life 18 months ago, and within 3 months she had moved into the apartment I was paying for, and within 6 she had a wedding Pinterest board with 847 pins, and a budget that made my nursing salary look like a rounding error. I will call her by her name because she earned it, Brianna. Brianna was 29, worked as a freelance event stylist, which, as far as I could tell, meant she occasionally helped friends decorate for parties and had a very curated Instagram, and she had the particular talent of making every financial conversation feel like a personal attack on her taste level. When I said $28,000 wedding was too much, she looked at me with the expression of someone who has just been told the sky is green and said, "That's actually quite modest for what we're envisioning." What they were envisioning was a venue in the Annapolis Valley wine country, 140 guests, a florist flown in from Toronto because the local ones were, apparently, not quite right, a 5-tier cake from a bakery in Montreal that I had never heard of and Brianna had found through someone she followed on TikTok, a videographer, a second videographer for the behind-the-scenes footage, a photo booth, a live band for the reception, and a string quartet for the ceremony, shuttle buses from Halifax, a honeymoon in Portugal. Every single line item was presented to me, not as a request, but as a fait accompli. The venue deposit had already been paid on Marcus's credit card, which had a limit I had co-signed on 3 years ago when he was trying to build credit. The florist from Toronto had already been contacted. The cake consultation was already booked. I found out about the venue deposit when Marcus called me to say the credit card bill had come in, $8,400, non-refundable. Paid to a winery in Wolfville that required a booking deposit 6 months in advance. I sat in the parking lot of the hospital after a 12-hour night shift and I stared at my phone and I thought, he didn't ask me. He had my name on that credit card account and he spent $8,400 of available credit. Credit that existed because of my financial history, my credit score, my name, and he didn't ask me. When I called him, his first words were, "Before you say anything, Brianna already figured out how we're going to pay it back." And then he explained, very quickly, that they were planning to ask both families to contribute, that his income was going to increase because he'd just been offered a supervisor position at the coffee shop, and that the venue was truly exceptional and it was going to be the most important day of their lives. I said, "Marcus, you spent $8,400 without telling me." He said, "It's not like it's your money." And I thought, isn't it? I want to pause here and tell you about Brianna's relationship with money. specifically my money, because it had been developing for about a year by this point, and I had been making excuses for it that I now deeply regret. The first time I noticed it was at Christmas dinner, 8 months before the wedding deposit. She made a comment offhand, light, the kind of thing you can't call out without sounding oversensitive, about how Marcus was lucky to have a sister who was so generous. The way she said generous, like it was a fact she was cataloging, like she was filing it away. By February, she was CC'd on the email thread with Marcus's landlord because she was managing the apartment. By March, she had suggested, also offhand, that since I was already covering Marcus's rent, it might make sense to move somewhere a bit nicer. The current place was quite small for 2 people. I said I'd think about it. She had already toured 2 apartments by the time I said no. She asked me once, while we were all having dinner at Montana's in Dartmouth, whether I had a will. I'm 31 and in good health, and she asked me, over ribs, whether I had a will and who the beneficiary was. I changed the subject. She brought it up again 20 minutes later. After the credit card situation, I started keeping a document on my phone, a note. Every financial request, every comment, every assumption. Dates, amounts, exact words. Not because I planned to use it, just because I needed to see it written down to believe it was real. By April, the total in that document, what I had spent or been expected to spend in the previous 18 months, was $61,200. Rent, bills, credit card minimums I'd covered when Marcus was short, the $8,400 deposit, a car repair, a dental bill Brianna had because she didn't have coverage and it was just easier if I helped since I had my work benefits. $61,200. I am a nurse. I work rotating 12-hour shifts. I have been doing this since I was 24. I have not been on a vacation that lasted longer than 4 days in 3 years. I drive a 2017 Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper that I have been meaning to fix since 2022. In May, Brianna called me. Not Marcus. Brianna. She said she wanted to talk about the wedding budget woman to woman, which was a phrase that should have been my first warning. She said she understood that the numbers were significant, but that she and Marcus had really thought about this, and that a wedding only happens once, and that she felt it was important for Marcus to have this moment, especially given everything he'd been through with losing their mother. Their mother. She said their mother. My mother. She said their mother. I didn't say anything for a long time. Then I said, "What exactly are you asking me for?" She said the total remaining balance for the wedding, after the deposit, was $31,500. She said she and Marcus could cover $8,000 of that between them. She said she was hoping I could help with the rest, $23,500. I said I needed to think about it. She said of course. But the venue needs the next payment by June 1st, so just keep that in mind. I want to tell you about the week after that phone call, because it's the week everything changed. I worked 4 shifts. I came home and I sat with my notes document and I read it from the beginning. I thought about my mother. I thought about what she actually said, take care of your brother, and I thought about whether what I had been doing for 6 years bore any resemblance to that. I called my best friend Sophie, who was a family lawyer in Halifax and who had been watching this situation for 2 years, with the particular expression of someone physically restraining themselves from giving advice. I told her about the $23,500 request. I told her about the credit card. I told her about the document. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I need you to listen to me very carefully. You were a co-signer on that credit card. Do you understand what that means if he defaults?" I did understand. I just hadn't let myself think about it. Sophie walked me through everything. The credit card liability, the fact that I had no legal obligation to fund a wedding, the fact that my name being on a lease or a credit account did not mean those accounts were community property to be spent by whoever felt entitled to them. She was measured and professional, and by the end of the call, I felt something shift in my chest, like a door I had been holding shut for 6 years finally, slowly, opening. I did not call Marcus or Brianna back that week. I made some calls of my own. On the 3rd Saturday of May, Marcus and Brianna came to my apartment for lunch. I had made soup, butternut squash, because Brianna had mentioned once that she didn't eat red meat, and I had been accommodating that for 2 years without being asked. I set the table properly. I made tea. After lunch, Marcus said, and I could tell Brianna had coached him because he had that careful, measured tone he gets when he's reciting rather than speaking. He said he hoped I'd had time to think about the wedding budget and that they were really counting on me, and that this was important not just for them, but for the family, and that Mum would have wanted Marcus to have a proper wedding. He said Mum would have wanted it. I looked at him across the table. My little brother, who I have been supporting for 6 years, who I covered for when he dropped out twice, who I co-signed for because I wanted him to have a foundation, who I watched grow up and who I love. I looked at him and I thought, she said take care of you. She said nothing about $61,000 and a winery venue and a florist from Toronto. I said, I've decided I'm not going to contribute to the wedding. Brianna's expression went very still. The kind of still that isn't calm. She said, I'm sorry. I said, I've also spoken to the bank. I'm removing myself as co-signer from the credit card. You'll receive formal notification this week. Marcus will need to manage that account on his own going forward. Marcus said, you can't do that. I said, I already did. I started the process on Tuesday. Brianna stood up. She did it slowly, the way people do when they want you to understand that they are choosing to be restrained. She said, do you have any idea what this does to our plans? We have vendors who are expecting payment. We have guests who have already booked travel. I said, those are your plans. I didn't make them, she said. Your brother asked you for help. Your family is asking you for help. Your mother? I said, don't. The word came out quiet. I surprised myself with how quiet it was. I said, do not use my mother. Not for this. There was a silence in my apartment that I will not forget for the rest of my life. Outside, the harbor was gray. A ferry was crossing. Everything was very still. Brianna picked up her bag. She looked at Marcus and the look meant, say something. Marcus lifted his hands. She looked back at me and she said, you are a selfish, jealous woman who has never wanted your brother to be happy. She said it very clearly, like she was reading from a prepared statement. And when his marriage is successful and his life is full and yours is empty, I want you to remember this moment. Then she walked to my front door and she opened it and she said to Marcus, we're leaving. Marcus got up. He didn't look at me. He said, at the door, without turning, I'll call you when you've decided to be a real sister. I didn't move from my chair. I listened to the elevator. I listened to the lobby door. I sat in my apartment where I pay rent alone, in the city where I'd built my career alone, and I poured myself a second cup of tea, and I was, for the first time in 6 years, completely quiet inside. Here is what happened next, and I want to be precise because the details matter. The credit card removal processed on May 28th. I had given 30 days notice as required, and the bank confirmed the co-signer removal was complete. Marcus's solo credit limit was reassessed at $2,100 based on his own income and credit history. The previous limit had been $11,000. On June 1st, the venue payment deadline Brianna had mentioned, Marcus did not have the funds. The $6,500 second installment to the Wolfville Winery went unpaid. On June 3rd, the venue sent a notice of breach of payment terms. Under the contract, which I had, in fact, quietly obtained a copy of because Sophie had suggested I understand what obligations my name was or wasn't attached to, and it turned out my name was on nothing. Under the contract, failure to pay the June installment triggered a 10-day cure period. If payment was not received by June 13th, the $8,400 deposit was forfeit. Marcus called me on June 4th. I did not answer. He texted, the venue is going to take our deposit. Can we talk? I texted back, I hope you find a solution. I'm not in a position to help with the wedding. He texted, this is $8,400. That's real money. I know it's real money. I know exactly what real money feels like. I've been handing it over for 6 years. Brianna did not call me. She texted from her own number once on June 7th. It was a long message. I read it once and did not respond. The words your mother appeared twice and jealous appeared once, and I closed the message and went to make dinner. June 13th came and went. The deposit was forfeited. I found out through Marcus's cousin Delia, who was my closest family connection outside of Marcus and who had been watching the whole situation with quiet, worried eyes for years. Delia texted me, I heard about the venue. I'm sorry this has all happened. How are you? I told her the truth. I told her I was okay. I told her I was more okay than I had been in a long time. The wedding, as far as I know, has been reduced significantly in scope. I have heard through Delia that they are planning something much smaller. No Annapolis Valley Winery. No florist from Toronto. I have also heard that Marcus has been stressed and that Brianna has been telling people in their social circle that I sabotaged the wedding out of jealousy. I want to be honest. Hearing that hurt, not because it's true, because it's the story she got to tell first, and I know how stories work when one person tells them and the other stays quiet. But here's what also happened. The week after June 13th, Sophie and two of my nursing colleagues, Priya and Tam, both of whom had been listening to Marcus and Brianna updates for 18 months over shift coffees in the break room, came to my apartment on a Friday evening with wine and Indian takeout from a place on Quinpool Road that we all love. We sat on my kitchen floor because my table isn't big enough for four. Priya brought her speaker. Tam told a story about her own family that made me cry and then laugh within 4 minutes. Sophie talked about a case she couldn't name, and we guessed what happened and were completely wrong. We were there until 1 in the morning. I did not think about the deposit once. I think about my mother often. I think about her hands and the way she said my name and the particular October light in her hospital room. I think about the promise I made, and I want to be honest with you. I kept it. I kept it for 6 years, and I kept it longer than it was mine to keep. There is a version of take care of your brother that means be present, be loving, answer the phone, show up when he's struggling. I do all of those things. I will always do those things. There is another version that means fund his life indefinitely, absorb whatever financial decisions his fiancée makes, and accept that your own stability and security are less important than their comfort. I did that version for 6 years too. I am not doing it anymore. I removed myself from the credit card account and the $8,400 is gone and the wedding is smaller and Marcus is not speaking to me, and I want to tell you something true. I sleep better than I have in years. I go to work and I do my job, which is hard and meaningful and involves a lot of actual caring for people who are genuinely vulnerable. And I come home and I make dinner and I water my 2 plants and I look at the harbor from my window and I think about my own future, not the one I was being asked to subsidize. And I feel something that took me a while to name. It's called peace. My bank account, for the first time since I was 26, has a savings line that I look at without anxiety. I have booked 4 days in Prince Edward Island in August, my first real trip in 3 years. I have a plant that I was given as a birthday present 6 months ago that I have actually managed to keep alive, which feels disproportionately meaningful. I have people who show up on Friday evenings with wine and biryani and sit on my kitchen floor without needing anything from me except my company. If you are reading this and you are holding a promise that someone gave you while they were dying, I understand. I know what that weight feels like. I know how it becomes the justification for everything, how every request becomes filtered through, but she asked you to take care of him, how that sentence can stretch to cover things it was never designed to cover. Your person asked you to love them. They asked you to be present. They asked you not to abandon someone who was struggling. They did not ask you to disappear. Marcus knows how to find me. My number hasn't changed. If he calls without her coaching him, without a financial request attached, just him calling because he misses his sister, I will answer. I will always answer. That part of the promise I intend to keep forever, the rest of it is done. There is something I have come to understand, not from a book or from anyone telling me, but from living through it. The way we treat people over time is never invisible. Every decision leaves a mark, not in some abstract mystical sense, but in the most practical way possible. The people who extract from others without giving back, who use grief and obligation as leverage, who dress up entitlement as love, they are not building anything. They are spending down a balance that was never theirs to begin with, and eventually, the account closes. Brianna walked into my life with perfect confidence that my resources were available to her. She did not see a sister who had worked night shifts for years, who had quietly rebuilt after losing her mother, who had kept a promise at enormous personal cost. She saw a source. And for a long time, I let myself be seen that way, because the alternative meant admitting that the promise I was keeping had been stretched far past its original shape. What I did when I removed my name from that credit account was not an act of revenge. I want to be clear about that. It was an act of accuracy. I was correcting a situation that had become dishonest. Dishonest about what I owed, what I had agreed to, what I was capable of sustaining. The $8,400 that disappeared when the venue forfeited that deposit was not something I took from them. It was something they had already built on a foundation that was never solid, because they had built it on the assumption that I would always say yes. That is the thing about choices made without integrity. They require other people's ongoing cooperation to survive. The moment I stopped cooperating, the whole structure became visible for what it was. I think about the version of myself who said yes for 6 years. I don't resent her. She was doing what she believed was right. She was honoring something real. But she had confused loyalty with self-erasure, and those are not the same thing. Real loyalty does not require you to disappear. Real care for someone does not mean funding a life they have not earned and absorbing consequences for decisions you were never consulted on. I had to learn the difference, and the tuition was expensive. What I carry forward from all of this is not bitterness, it is clarity. I know now what I am willing to do for the people I love and exactly where that ends. I know that a boundary stated calmly and held quietly is not cruelty, it is self-respect made visible. I know that the people who call you selfish for finally saying no were never actually grateful when you were saying yes. And I know this, the Friday night on my kitchen floor with Sophie and Priya and Tam, eating takeout and laughing until midnight, was worth more to me than every yes I said out of obligation. That is what I was protecting all along without knowing it, not money, not pride. The actual life I was supposed to be living.